Hello again from Fired Up. I'm your host for the show, Bob Irwin, broadcasting from Rigel Studios here in Las Vegas, Nevada. This show is about guns, related political issues, and self-defense. Fired Up is on our website, firedupwithbobirwin.com. A new show is posted every Thursday at around 5 p.m. Pacific time. These shows also appear on YouTube and numerous other media. The audio feed is rebroadcast for radio listeners Saturdays at noon on the Nevada Talk Network. You can check out the stations at KELY1230.com for the station in your area. It's about 18 stations now that carry this, AM and FM. If you have questions or comments, you can send an email to me, bob@firedupmail.com. That's bob@firedupmail.com. Or leave a message on my office recorder, which is 702-257-1060. That's 702-257-1060. If you leave contact information, we'll respond by email, text, or telephone. My guest today has his own contact information, which we'll run a little bit later in the show. There are several hundred defensive uses of firearms every week in the United States, rarely covered by any mainstream media. So we always present a few gun issues, gun situations for our listeners' education. Most are good shootings, some are questionable, sometimes they're just plain wrong. We have one or two of those today. But all are educational for firearms owners. Bear in mind, please, individual incidents are generally adjudicated under local law. So the advice given here may not apply to listeners in different jurisdictions. The incidents generally are as reported, except generally I eliminate the names of the players. So we don't need those, what the guy's name was. We only need to know what happened so you can compare it to your situation. My guest today is Nevada and California firearms attorney Donald J. Green. Don, a bit of your background, if you would, please.
Well, thank you, Bob. Once again, for the benefit of your listeners, my name is Don Green, and I'm a lawyer in California and Nevada. The emphasis of my practice deals with firearms litigation, firearms legislation, representation of people before various agencies such as the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, FBI, and local jurisdictions having the authority to either issue concealed weapons permits or, in some instances, whether they'll grant federal firearms licenses, or grant the zoning for a federal firearms license. Your listeners and viewers can contact me directly on my cellular at area code 702-409-8239. And again, my email contact information will be broadcast later in this show. Thanks, Bob.
All right. If you have a regulatory problem, particularly with firearms, Don Green is your man. Give him a call. He fixes that stuff. This story comes to us from the Las Vegas Review-Journal. Caitlin Newberg is a reporter. She wrote an article on the 2nd of this month, a couple days ago. We're making the show on the 6th for broadcast. On the 8th, if that makes sense to you. Officers were called to the Skyfall Lounge at the top of the Delano Hotel on the Strip just after 10 p.m. A friend of an off-duty 26-year-old police officer explained that the officer was there with 5 other people. He was concealed carrying his gun on the front of his body, in what we call an appendix carry, where you carry it across the front of your body. The friend said his wife gave the off-duty officer her purse for him to place his gun in, because he really did not want to be carrying it inside where there's drinking and dancing and so forth. As he was putting the gun into the purse, a shot went off. After the shot took place, the friends took the gun, took the magazine out of the gun, cleared the chamber. When an on-duty officer arrived, they found the off-duty officer sitting on a couch, suffering from a gunshot wound to his lower torso. He was taken then by paramedics to University Medical Center with survivable injuries. No one else was injured. A spokesman for the MGM Resorts, which owns the Delano, declined to comment on the shooting. I'm not declining to comment. First off, we talk about gun accidents and all sorts of rules and so forth. Honestly now, anybody who carries a loaded firearm for work day in and day out, who claims to have never had an accidental discharge is, in my opinion, probably lying. It's just there are no witnesses when you made up your story, so nobody knows that you had an accidental discharge. Safety rule number one is you keep the firearm pointed in a safe direction. If you obey that rule, as I have said over and over, when you fire your gun, nobody dies, nobody gets wounded, safe direction. Whether you know it's loaded, unloaded, you always point it in a safe direction. When the firearm discharge hits a human, it commonly hits the human that was holding the gun. This is another statistical thing where if you shoot your gun off and it hits somebody, it very likely hits the person that holds the gun. You're your own worst enemy. Generally, you get shot in the foot or in the thigh or in the calf because they're done handling the gun pointed down, or you're drawing the gun with your finger on the trigger. Various things happen. There's a lot of variations of that steam. But I am to say this. Anybody who carries a gun all the time, who claims he never had an AD, is probably lying. I want to quote, let he is without sin cast the first stone. I've read that somewhere in a big thick book. The officer is going to be okay, according to the sheriff. And there's just really no excuse for pointing a gun at yourself and pulling the trigger. Whether we pulled the trigger or it hit something in the purse or whatever, we don't know. And I'm sorry, but I can't resist. The officer who shot himself is assigned to the Downtown Area Command's Tourist Safety Division. It's just had to say that. I have to confess that I have had a accidental discharge or 2 or 5 in my career. That's why I say anybody who says they never had one hasn't really been there and done that and carried a gun all the time. But anyway, it's unfortunate. It's a lesson for everybody who carries a gun. Don't point it at yourself when you're handling it, and this won't happen. Mr. Green.
Forget about the fact that this was a police officer. A person who is carrying a firearm should never, under any circumstance, hand that firearm or place that firearm in any purse, briefcase, satchel, fanny pack, whatever, especially if that weapon is loaded. So, as I see it, the officer can and possibly should be charged with a felony, discharge of a firearm in an area in which people are likely to be injured. If this was a regular citizen on the street, there would be a clamor of negative publicity.
That's correct. And
because of, again, of what is going on in this world when it comes to firearms. Just this weekend, and the legislation, which we'll talk about later, perhaps this week may happen. So even if you're carrying legally, you never give your weapon to someone else, regardless of whether you're at a club. Leave the weapon in the trunk. Leave the weapon at home. Don't go to the club armed, period. So I'm taking a little bit different stance than Bob, because if you're the average Joe on the street, you may very well be in jail once you're released from the hospital or released from your convalescence, or at least charged and get a summons to appear in court on possible felony charges. So the fact that there is an accidental discharge is not a defense if you could have prevented it, because then it doesn't become an accident. It's something which is entirely preventable. So like if this happened in Los Angeles, somebody could go to jail. In Las Vegas, well, you know, I can't tell you about any political pressures here, but I'm just telling you that there is a possibility that this officer could be charged, especially because he's at a nightclub at the top of the Delano Hotel, which is probably about 25 or 30 stories just back of Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There are a number of things that we have to recognize in this world, that we live in a world of politics and people. And what Don is saying is quite correct. Suppose this had been a guy in the crowd listening to the Democratic debate and his gun went off accidentally. There are police officers there carrying guns, obviously. You know, everybody would assume in our political climate that everything has to do with politics and this and that and the other thing. We're living in a time where you have to be more careful, always. Hopefully this will fade away in the officer's career. I had a friend at the LA County Sheriff's Office years and years ago when I lived in Los Angeles that carried a over and under Derringer in a handcuff case on the back of his pants. He carried two handcuff cases. One had handcuffs, the other had this Derringer in it, 38 caliber Derringer. And in the locker room one day, he was pushing it into the handcuff case, obviously behind him and not looking at it, and it wouldn't go in straight, and he pushed down on it hard, and what was wrong was the hammer was caught on the edge of the handcuff case. It pulled back part way, went forward, and shot him in the ass. He later became a decorated captain, a member of the retirement party at the LA County Sheriff's Office, and as he's receiving his award for service and valor and all this stuff for his wonderful 25-year career, the deputy chief that was handling him the plaque said, "Aren't you the guy who shot yourself in the ass?" They follow you forever. We're going to get a little more serious now. We have, as I'm sure everyone listening to this knows, we've had some horrific shootings in Dayton, Ohio, and El Paso, and another one in California now. They've ignited a firestorm of firearm regulation proposals, of course. The left side legislatures, led by Democratic presidential candidates mostly, are demanding new laws, regulations, and decrees to confiscate all semi-automatic firearms and more. When I wrote the outline, I had that on there. Now they want, a couple of them want all your guns permanently seized. As I understand, there's just a firestorm of media data on this, and you never really know who to believe on the media, that they're telling the truth. But I know one guy to believe. He's sitting next to me here. So, Don, you're keeping up with this. What's going on?
Yes, well, Bob, as we have discussed, possibly this week, Senator Dianne Feinstein is going to try to revive her Senate Bill 66, which is an omnibus assault weapons ban. And I think that there might even try to be some kind of emergency sessions in Congress and the Senate on a weapons ban. I know that Mitch McConnell, Senate Majority Leader, is probably getting a lot of flack from liberal Republicans and, of course, from all the Democrats. The president himself has made a speech in the past 24 to 48 hours on mental health issues and firearms, and calling for some serious talk about firearms. And as Bob points out, there are totally uninformed Democratic candidates for president who do want to confiscate all firearms, and they just have no concept of what the Second Amendment says. And what's not being reported in the mainstream media is just as important as what is being reported by just about everybody. We've compiled some statistics. If we could have the first slide, please. In the year 2019, just in the city of Chicago alone, there were 43 murders in July. In Baltimore, which is now the center of a lot of controversy, there were 38 murders. and you didn't hear all this controversy, you didn't hear, and all these were were firearms, and you didn't hear all of this clamor for gun control. But in Gilroy, California, 3 people were killed. In El Paso, Texas, 22, possibly more people were killed. And in Dayton, Ohio, 9 people are killed, for a total of 34. Now, that is less than all the people killed in one city in Baltimore. That is less than all of the people, that's like 45% of all the people killed in the city of Chicago. If we could have the next slide, please. Or go up on the first slide, we should say. If we could go, there we go. All right. In 2019, just Chicago alone, which is run by formerly Rahm Emanuel and now with another Democratic mayor, in 2019 to date, this has the highest number of murder victims were killed with bullets and handguns as follows. To the head, there were 85 victims. 43 were killed. Chest wounds were 63 victims. In the back, 21 people killed with 128 wounded. And Bob's favorite statistic, there were 80 people shot in the buttocks. That's just up to August 1st, 2019 in one city. Probably going to be several hundred murders before the end of the year. And under the administration of Rahm Emanuel, remember, he was the former chief of staff for President Obama, who became the mayor of Chicago for 8 years between 2011 and 2019. There were 4,535 slayings in that city alone with firearms. One of the most tightly controlled city atmospheres when it comes to handling firearms. And wasn't it a few years ago, Bob, that you even had to have a permit to go and touch a gun at a gun store?
Yeah.
You had to have a special permit.
Yeah.
I can't remember the name of the card, but I've seen some of them. So this is what your viewers and your listeners have to pay attention. Because what won the election in 2016 were people who, the silent majority, these silent people who went to these rallies and they let their voices be known. But this time it's not going to work because the Democrats have got a completely new voter base out there with thousands of felons who are being released from the prisons of the United States in the United States who are now going to become eligible voters. And the Democrats in power are going to say, remember, I was the one who allowed you to vote. And now they want to not deny the votes to undocumented aliens when it clearly says shall not deny the citizens the right to vote. Yeah. They're not even citizens. So this is what these people have to do. Don't sit at home. Don't be silent. Let your voice be heard in your own circles and talk to other people. It's got to be done because this week is going to be very telling as to what's going to happen in the future of firearms in the United States and possibly the possible future of the Second Amendment in years to come, although it takes 2/3 of the states to do anything to change the amendment. And don't say they can't do it because look what happened with Prohibition. People don't even realize that in the early 1900s early 1920s, we had a federal constitutional amendment which prohibited the importation and interstate commerce of any and all distilled liquors.
Yep.
They could do it with firearms.
And the mob came to the fore and ran at everything and made millions of dollars, and everybody still got drunk anyway. You can't legislate morality. It just doesn't seem to work out when you do that. People are going to be people. Engineer, how much time we got? I didn't clock it when I started this. Pardon me? Oh, yeah. Oh, that's right. We got to run a little bit, some slides here of some of our sponsors. So we'll be right back. This first slide is the Freestyle Martial Arts Studio. They're at Jones and the corner of Jones and Russell. Great place. Freestyle Martial Arts. There can be reached at 702-551-9009. freestylemma.com. Give him a call. This guy is great. CCS Gunsmithing on Rainbow Boulevard. It's at 2016 South Rainbow, 702-365-1732. Chris Eifelt is there and his darling wife, and they support the NRA and do all the NRA events. Give them a call. My friend Jerry Creed, who, the slide we're looking at says he does estate planning and Medicaid pre-planning and so forth. He also does gun trusts. If you have a firearms trust, particularly if you have a Class 3 trust, that you want to pass those on to your heirs, you need to call Jerry and get it updated. They change these rules every 5 minutes. Don't buy one online, it's 3 pages. Jerry's have to run about 17, 18 pages now to cover all the changes in the law. 702-806-7777. Jerry Creed. An attorney, a gun attorney, Don Green. Don Green Law is self-explanatory for these. You can reach Don on his cell phone, 702-409-8239. He actually answers that. Called him several times today, as a matter of fact, and he's there. This is the guy you need when you run into regulatory problems or gun in general problems. You also do more standard litigation, but predominantly the guy who keeps up with the gun laws and knows what the answers are. And, my friend Maggie Mordaunt. I keep saying my friend, but these are my friends. If you look up CCW Maggie, M-A-G-G-I-E, CCW Maggie, on the internet, she teaches all over the place, all over the world now, and trains people for NRA courses and to be NRA instructors. Perfect. Go to her if you need training. The #1 instructor in my mind. And my favorite watering hole, Ricardo's. You will find me there if I'm not here broadcasting. They're at Flamingo and Decatur. You can call them at 702-227-9100. They do all sorts of meetings and parties and seminars and so forth and so on. Got lots of private rooms. Try Ricardo's. You will love Ricardo's. And 8 minutes? Okay. This last story comes from the Patriot Ledger in Marshfield, Massachusetts. It says gunfire was exchanged in a possible home invasion. Police are investigating a report of gunfire at the Brant Rock, that's the name of the suburb, early Saturday morning after a 911 caller reported an armed intruder. Marshfield Police Chief Phil Traveris said police were sent to the home on Cherry Street just before 3 a.m. Saturday after a 911 call came in reporting a home invasion. He said the resident exchanged gunfire back and forth with the suspect. Traveris said local, county, and state law enforcement set up a perimeter around the home, but were unable to locate a suspect. He said it was an active investigation that drew police with dogs, drones, and a helicopter to the area. Now, here it gets weird. The next afternoon, the victim, called the Patriot Ledger, that's the news media here, reporter that said he was woken up before the shots started because someone went in his house. He lives at the home on Cherry Street with 3 other people. We have been here for almost 2 years and nothing like this ever happened, he said. He told the media the intruder was a male and that he had a gun. He also said someone else in the house also had a gun, but he declined to say who. The Mayfield police said on Facebook that investigators have no reason to believe the suspect is still at large. The department said there were no reports of injuries. We'd like to thank the public for their cooperation, said the chief. A neighbor who lived next to the house next door told the victim for the 40 years he's lived next to this guy, said it's a small street and everybody knows everybody, so of course it wasn't supposed to be dangerous here, This is about the weirdest case I've ever seen. The victim called the reporter the next day to say someone else in the home had a gun, but he declines to say who that is. In any shooting, no matter how valid you think it is, talk to your attorney and never speak to the media. This guy calls the reporter himself. I expect investigators are finding this even more interesting. Mr. Green.
Bob, did or did not the resident call 911?
Yes.
Okay, so when the resident calls 911 and says that he exchanged gunfire back and forth with the suspect, the police respond appropriately with, they got police dogs, it's an active shooting, drones, there's a helicopter. I do not know how large Marshfield, Massachusetts is, but it appears as if they pulled out all the stops for this particular investigation. And then what, as you say, it gets weird.
Yeah.
He calls the press the next day, not the police.
Have you ever heard of that?
No.
Ever. This is my first ever.
I mean, I've had people who have called the attorney first,
Yeah.
which I tell them, how good is that going to look when you call the attorney first when there's a shooting? And then when he told the media that the intruder was a male and that the intruder had a firearm, and he said someone else in the house had a firearm, but declined to identify that particular person. It seems as if, was there an actual shooting? Was he popping off rounds by himself? I mean, we don't have enough in here about whether these are semi-autos, which would eject the casing. We don't have any information on whether these are revolvers. But I think that if this was in Nevada, the homeowner would probably have some problems or face some serious questioning. In California, it is likely that the homeowner was going to be arrested for the discharge of the firearm in the home, because he did or he did not say that he lived in the home with 3 other people. Yeah. So we have a situation where it depends on where you are. And I want to say that Massachusetts is not the most gun-friendly jurisdiction in the United States, but this is definitely weird. And I think that the police are probably treating this as possibly, this is not an accidental discharge, drug-fueled, alcohol-fueled, or stupidity-fueled.
Or the whole thing is a hoax because
Yeah.
he wanted to get in the newspaper, and he's going to get a giant bill from the police department for all this investigatory time and so forth and so on. I just can't imagine somebody doing this. Hey, we're about out of time. I want to remind listeners, we have a gun show coming up this weekend. This show is being broadcast on the 8th, and on August 10 and 11, we have the Crossroads of the West gun show. It's downtown at the Pavilions. The parking is free. It's right near the Rufo Brain Center. If you get treated there, you'll know where it is. We're sending the guy from this last story down there to be checked out, I think, if we can find him. You can check out all our recent shows at firedupwithboberwin.com. It contains our current shows. There's 18 or 20 of them up there now, maybe more. New shows are being added as we get through the change from high def to back from those were done in low def and I don't know electronics. I can't even work my car starter. The commercials that you see, the sponsors, keep us on the air. So please patronize our friends and supporters. Capitalism wins every time. We'll be back next Thursday on our website, firedupwithboberwin.com, and on YouTube at the American Guns and Glory Network. You should subscribe to them too. They have our shows up first before anybody else. Watch Any Media. Whenever you see our show, if you click subscribe, the new shows will be sent to your computer or phone automatically. Please share these broadcasts with your friends. You can check out our logo merchandise at Fired Up with Bob Irwin Store, firedupwithboberwinstore.com. And remember, the audio portion is repeated on the Nevada Talk Network all across Nevada, Saturdays at noon. Thank you very much for watching Fired Up. We'll be back next week. I think I got Don coming back next week also. So we will be back here 1 week from now, and have a good weekend. See you at the gun show, hopefully.
Yes, thank you again, Bob.